The most evil, meaning there is nothing more evil. The most evil thing is the bid'ah. The most evil thing is the innovation. But the foundation from which kufr comes is innovation in the first place.
But why is it that you take it at such a literal meaning that it's the worst? I mean, we've got things like, there's murder, zina, prostitution, stealing, all these sins are out there. You're saying that that's worse than these sins? Like, how does that rationally even make sense?
Of course, the Prophet said it. He said, "Wa sharrul umur." He said, "It's an evil thing. What more do you want from the Prophet? How can you tell me not to take it literally?" That's so silly to say. Is the default of not speech that is taken literal? I'm telling you that the zina that most people are doing is based on bid'ah.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers and sisters, welcome back to another episode of Roast Dawahman. As you guys can probably tell, we are not in the studio. We're currently at home due to the lockdown. We're not able to attend the office or the studio, so we are working from home. And so obviously we're going to have to sacrifice on the quality. Now, obviously, as you guys know, for us, quality is a big thing. We want to make sure that all the videos we put out are, the best quality. But when you're put in a situation like this, you just have to make the best out of it. So without further ado, let's get into today's topic. Before we do, you want to quickly give salam to the people?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
So just to mention, obviously, as you know, in our very, very first episode that we did, we discussed the issue of Tawheed and La ilaha illallah. And we discussed why you keep talking about it, bringing topics back to La ilaha illallah, back to Tawheed, and why it was such a big focal point of your da'wah. Another thing that I've noticed is you talk a lot about
I have a translation of Kitab al-Tawheed next to me.
Let's stick to the topic. So, you always try and mention innovation, innovators, bid'ah, and this is something which is another focal point, I think we can say, of your da'wah. And when we look at the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we compare the ratio, or how many ahadith there are about bid'ah.
And I also have a book on innovation next to me.
Distraction tactics are not going to work, bro. Let's focus on the topic. Yeah. So you keep, which you know what, they are working now. I forgot what I was saying.
It's another kitab bid'ah.
You talk a lot about bid'ah. And, just to prove that fact, the books around you right now are
another one on bid'ah.
So look, this is what I mean. Is this not a problem? That
another one on bid'ah. I did this intentionally.
4 out of the books around you are on bid'ah. But the next question, if you look at the ratio of hadith on bid'ah to the hadiths that are out there, millions, you see that it's a very small number. It's not like the amount you talk about, it seems to be out of ratio. The Prophet's da'wah was very diverse, was about many, being good to the orphans, Zakat, Hajj, it was very comprehensive. For you, it seems to be very focused, Tawheed, Bid'ah, Tawheed, Bid'ah, Tawheed, Bid'ah. Shirk, Tawheed, Bid'ah, Sunnah. These seem to be the two main focal points of your da'wah. And someone might say that you go a bit too much into talking about it. You give it too much importance. So what would you say to that?
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Sorry, I've already said salam. But anyway. So you mentioned that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's da'wah consisted of many things: taking care of the orphans, being there for the poor and the needy, being good to the neighbor, respecting, obeying your parents, good manners. And without a shadow of a doubt, these are all things that are part and parcel of the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But what you have to understand is that there are some things that are foundational, some things that are secondary. From the foundational things is, for example, Tawheed and Sunnah. You see, when a person wants to become Muslim, they must testify the testimony of faith, where they bear witness and they testify that there is no one worthy to be worshipped in truth except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, la ma'buda bihaqqin illallah. There is no one worthy to be worshipped in truth except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, it's not enough for you to just come with that. You may come with Tawheed, you may come with the purest form of Tawheed. But if you didn't come with Muhammad Rasulullah, if you didn't come with the fact that the Prophet ﷺ is the messenger and slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, then your Islam is not complete. Now, a person who does shirk violates La ilaha illallah, and a person who does bid'ah violates Muhammad Rasulullah. So what does it mean when a person says, I come with Muhammad Rasulullah? What does it mean? It means four things. طاعته فيما أمر وتصديقه فيما أخبر واجتناب ما نهى عنه وزجر وألا يعبد الله إلا بما شرع. The last point is what I want to focus on, is that you, by accepting the Prophet ﷺ as the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have also accepted that you will now not worship Allah by any other way other than how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us to worship Allah. Otherwise, what is the point of the Prophet? What is the point of sending a messenger if everyone could do whatever they wanted? What is the point of sending a messenger to teach you and I how to worship? What's the point of the messenger is what? لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ, to clarify to people, to teach the people, to show the people. Does that make sense? Now one might say, okay, Brother Imran, but you haven't given me a dalil, right, to show the importance of bid'ah, and you asked for hadith, and you mentioned that there is a million plus ahadith, and when we say million, we mean we're not talking about the individual text of that hadith. It's including and inclusive of the different chains of narrations. I know you might have the same hadith in terms of the text, but the Salaf would consider it different if there was 15 different chains for it, for example. So you asked for a hadith, you asked for text. You asked for text, and I'll give you some text to show you that the Prophet ﷺ himself, the same one who used to be kind to the orphan, the same one who would be there for the widow, the same one who used to defend the women, the same one who encouraged and taught good manners, how he was when it came to the issue of innovation. There's a hadith in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, he narrates that when the Prophet ﷺ would give a khutbah, إذا خطب, if he would give a khutbah, what would happen? احمرت عيناه, his eyes would become red. His eyes would become red. What does that mean? He's becoming angry. He's speaking loud. وعلى صوته, his voice should become raised. He would shout. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. واشتد غضبه. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. His anger would become intensified. حتى كأنه منذر جيش. It's as if he was warning you of an enemy, warning you of an army that's coming. Like imagine a man warns you of an army. Hey, there's an army coming. There's an army coming. Save yourself. That is how Jabir is describing the Prophet ﷺ. And what was it that he was saying in this khutbah? He was saying, وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ مُحْدَثَاتُهَا, the most evil, meaning there is nothing more evil. The most evil thing is the bid'ah. The most evil thing is the innovation. So there's nothing more evil than it. Now you may ask, what about shirk? Is shirk not a type, is that not the worst sin? It is. But did you know shirk is a type of bid'ah? What is bid'ah? Bid'ah is to do something in the religion, or to do something as an act of worship that is not a part of the religion in the first place. For example, celebrating the Prophet's birthday, uniting with the innovators, and unity is a part of our deen, but not uniting with people of innovation. That is in itself an innovation, as we discussed in the last episode. And many types of innovations. I think we all know what innovation is. I'm saying these things right here, okay, the Prophet ﷺ is becoming very angry talking about them. He's becoming very angry. He's raising his voice, eyes becoming red. So I tell him, anything is the worst of things. And shirk is a type of worship. You're bringing something new to the religion. By worshipping another God besides Allah, you're bringing something to your worship which is not from it. So shirk is a type of bid'ah. Which is why Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said that the default, or rather, sorry, not default, but the foundation from which kufr comes is innovation in the first place. If you look at the Jews and the Christians, did they used to be Muslim, yes or no?
Yeah.
Were the Christians Muslim? Of course they were. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? فَلَمَّا أَحَسَّ عِيسَى مِنْهُمُ الْكُفْرَ قَالَ مَنْ أَنصَارِي إِلَى اللَّهِ قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله آمنا بالله واشهد بأننا مسلمون. The Christians, the disciples of Isa alayhi salam, Allah said they took a testimony. They said واشهد بأننا مسلمون. They say, bear witness, we are Muslims. But why is the Christians today are kuffar? Can you be a Muslim and a kafir at the same time?
No.
So then how do these Christians that were Muslims become kuffar?
Because they disbelieved in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
But where did sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No, I'm saying even before the Prophet came, they were kuffar. Their Prophet was Isa alayhi salam. What made them kuffar was bid'ah. What made them kuffar was innovation. Slowly, the religion kept changing bit by bit, 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 until what? It's a completely different religion to what Islam is now. أَمْ لَهُمْ شُرَكَاءُ شَرَعُوا لَهُ مِنَ الدِّينِ مَا لَمْ يَأْذَنْ بِهِ اللَّهُ. Allah said, do they have other partners besides Allah that legislate for them in the religion, that which Allah hasn't given you authority? So they legislated in the religion. This is part of the religion. So Paul came, he added something. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John came in and gave their flavors. Constantine came in, he gave his flavors. The Pope came and put something in, and everyone put something in until the religion of Christianity changed. Judaism was just like that. So bid'ah is that which changes the religion until it becomes absolute clear-cut disbelief. So bid'ah is the worst thing. Okay. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, and this hadith, if I'm not mistaken, is in Sunnah Abi Dawood, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave a reminder, and the companions saw it like a farewell reminder, and they were getting very emotional. They were crying. They mentioned that their hearts were, wajilat minha al-qulub. The hearts became affected due to it, and they asked for the Prophet ﷺ, they asked him for some advice, for some farewell advice. What was the Prophet's farewell advice? What did he say? He said, فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ يَعِشْ مِنْكُمْ, anyone from amongst you who lives, فَسَيَرَى اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If you live after me, you're going to see a lot of disputes. فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِسُنَّتِي, hold on to my sunnah. The holding on to the sunnah is the thing that gets rid of disunity. Not ignoring the sunnah and uniting with innovators. Holding on to the sunnah and cutting off from the innovators will actually ultimately bring you to unity. فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِسُنَّتِي, upon you is my sunnah, and the sunnah of my khulafa, my rightly guided khulafa, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. And then the Prophet ﷺ, after he told you to hold on to it with your motive, he told you what the cause of the problem was in the first place. He said, وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحْدَثَاتِ الْأُمُورِ, stay away from the newly invented matters. فَإِنَّ كُلَّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ, because every single innovation, newly invented matter is misguidance. In another narration, another riwayah, وَكُلَّ ضَلَالَةٍ فِي النَّارِ, and every single misguidance is in the hellfire. Actually, I've just given you 2 ahadith, and I've shown you, I can give you more, but the reason I chose these 2 ahadith because one, Jabir saying the Prophet, when he would give khutbah, he would say this, and he would become angry, his eyes would become red, and his voice would become loud. It's not a small issue, right? It's not a small issue if your eyes are becoming red and your voice is becoming loud and you're being described as a man warning of an army coming to attack. And the other hadith is the farewell reminder. It's like what was the companions saw as a farewell reminder of the Prophet ﷺ. What would you mention in your farewell reminder? Important stuff, right? Important stuff, right? Interesting. You know what his farewell reminder consisted of? The rights of Allah, the rights of the ruler, and the rights of Prophet ﷺ, and the rights of the companions. He said, أوصيكم بتقوى الله عز وجل, I advise you to fear Allah, وَسَمْعِ وَالطَّاعَ وَإِن تَأَمَّرَ عَلَيْكُمْ عَبْدٌ الْحَبَشِي, and to hear and obey Allah even if a Abyssinian slave is placed over you as a ruler. Why did he mention this? Because an Abyssinian and a slave, it's not necessarily an Abyssinian slave, but these are 2 categories. A slave and an Abyssinian, meaning a non-Qurayshi, a person who's not from Quraysh, are not allowed to be the rulers of the Muslims. A slave cannot rule the Muslims, he has to be a free man. Okay, he's not a slave, but he's Abyssinian, he's Pakistani, Afghani, he's Bengali. No, he has to be from Quraysh, which means he was not fit for the job, which means he only got into the job by taking over and spilling blood. So the Prophet is saying, hear and obey him, because he wouldn't just be given that leadership. He had to get into some haram means, whether he spoke blood or not. But the point is, he's not a legitimate ruler. Sorry, he's a legitimate ruler, but he didn't get in through legitimate means. Yet he was still told to be obeyed. And then the Prophet told you about the difference of opinion and disunity, and holding on to the sunnah is what will solve it. And then he told you the cause, stay away, bidah. Terrible advice, brother. So if that's not showing the importance and the seriousness of this, then I don't know what else will.
No, I don't think anyone is disputing the importance that it is something which is important, but I'm saying the level at which you place it seems to be a bit exaggerated. It seems to be a bit over the top. Like, is it really that bad? Like, cool, the Prophet mentioned it at the end of his life and so on and so forth, but what I'm trying to say is he didn't mention it every week, during his life. Like, if you look at the
Jabir said it was the Prophet's khutbah. When the Prophet would give khutbah, he would say it. Don't we hear in the khutbatul Hajj every Friday? We hear it every Friday. Inna alhamdulillah wa nahmadu wa nasta'inu wa nastaghfir. And at the end, وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحْدَثَاتِ الْأُمُورِ, فإن كل بدعة ضلالة وإن كل ضلالة في النار. There's the Prophet's khutbah, brother. Every Friday we hear it. It's repeated again and again and again and again and again. Do you see? So I don't know. You know what it is? Our problem. You know what our problem is? We don't actually study the Prophet's Sunnah. We hear bits and pieces from this guy and that guy and this guy and that guy. And whatever your local teacher projects onto you from what he took from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you now assume that's all the Prophet talked about. In fact, you bring me proof that the Prophet ﷺ was constantly talking about orphans. And I'm not denying he was, and it was as in he was standing for the rights of the orphans and the weak and the oppressed. It's something the Prophet was known for, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a big part of our religion. Walakin, you're trying to make it out, or you're trying to suggest that was more than innovation. So then you present it. I told you this is the Prophet's khutbah, brother. He would mention this in his khutbah, in his sermons, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's regular, bro. It's a constant theme. The Prophet wouldn't place this in his khutbah constantly if it wasn't such a big issue. He wouldn't mention it as his farewell advice if it wasn't such a big issue. He wouldn't be raising his voice if it wasn't such a big issue, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you know what's shocking is that his companions, did they fall into innovation? Were any of his companions innovators? No. The Prophet's companions were not innovators. They were safe from innovation, alhamdulillah. Okay? Every now and again, they might have made a mistake that goes against the Sunnah, but you don't call this a bid'ah. You call this khilaf as-Sunnah, because maybe it's because an evidence didn't reach them, but they misunderstood. But you don't call it an innovation. They might have made a mistake in a particular mas'ala here or there, but they didn't do innovation. So the Prophet is speaking to a group of people who are solid on the Sunnah. They are solid. Yeah, he's still shouting at them. And his eyes are still going red. And his voice is becoming loud. And he's getting angry. Stay away from innovation. Abu Bakr is standing in front of him. Umar is standing in front of him. Uthman, Ali are standing in front of him. They are mutamassikun bi sunnati nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They are the ones who hold on to the Prophet's Sunnah more than anyone else. Umar is the one who, if he heard somebody, where'd you get that from? You better bring me a hadith, I'm going to lash you. He would say, bring me a hadith, I'm going to lash you. And the Prophet's telling him. So what about us? Do we not need to be reminded? Do we not need to be told? Do we not need to be reminded of this? When we are drenched in innovation.
But why is it that you take it at such a literal meaning that it's the worst? I mean, we've got things like there's murder, zina, prostitution, stealing, all these sins are out there. And you're telling me that if someone, does tasbih using a tasbih, or the beads, you're saying that that's worse than these sins? Like, how does that rationally even make sense? Like, surely there's another interpretation, or there's another understanding. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that all innovation is worse than all sins.
So your example was very bad, the issue of the tasbih, because the issue of the tasbih, there are scholars of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah that differed, okay? And there's one thing I'd like to bring to people's attention right now before I answer the question, because what I'm going to say is going to shock a lot of people. It's going to shock. I'm going to show you how innovation is worse than the major sins, with the exception of shirk. And it's obviously a type of innovation as it is anyway, but before I shock you and you get a bit confused and in your mind equate what I'm saying to issues like the tasbih or whatever have you, which is the beads upon which people do the dhikr on, understand the difference between bid'ah and khilaf as-sunnah. Bid'ah is something which there is no asl in the deen, it's an innovation. And what? And that is something that is what we're talking about. There are some things that are khilaf as-sunnah, which is things that oppose the sunnah. But they do have an asl in the deen. They have some kind of an asl in the deen. For example, the people who do the tasbih, who do the dhikr on the prayer beads, does it have an asl in the deen? Dhikr. Dhikr has something that, when I say asl, does it have a foundation in the religion? So saying subhanallah, subhanallah on your fingers has an asl in the deen, has a foundation in the deen, has a foundation on religion. So the problem here is that the scholars are discussing, okay, you're doing something that's a part of our religion, but are you opposing the sunnah in doing it? Now, the opposition of the sunnah can come in 4 ways. There's something that the Prophet ﷺ taught us to do, something that's part of our religion, but you do it at the wrong time. Or you do it in the wrong place. Or you do it in the wrong frequency. Or you do what? You do it in the wrong. So it's makan, zaman, adad, and kayfiyah. You do it in the wrong way, if I'm not mistaken. If memory serves me right, you do it in the wrong way. So what's an example of doing something in the wrong place? What's an example of doing something in the wrong place? You're told to pray Tahiyatul Masjid, which is the 2 rak'ah that you pray when you go inside the masjid, right? Now, there's a masjid and there's a musalla. Musalla is, for example, like the prayer rooms that you have in universities, a musalla prayer room you might have in your house. You don't pray 2 rak'ah when you go in there. The 2 rak'ah is for the masjid, not for the musalla, not for the prayer hall or the prayer room.
Right.
So for you to pray your 2 rak'ah there, you're praying in the wrong place. This is not bid'ah in within itself. It's khilaf as-sunnah. You've opposed the sunnah. You've done something from the sunnah, but you oppose the sunnah in the way that you did it. Number 2 is the time. For example, in your Maghrib Salah, you're supposed to read out loud. But if you read out loud in your Dhuhr Salah, you've read out loud at the wrong time. So you've opposed the sunnah.
But you're saying that's not a bid'ah?
It's not a bid'ah straight away. Straight away, it is opposition to the sunnah, as in you made a mistake and you oppose the sunnah, but did it reach bid'ah yet? We'll come to it. The third thing, and this is the one that I want to, which is relevant to the issue of, the third thing, sorry, is adad, the frequency. For example, you're told to pray 2 rak'ah before Salatul Fajr, and you pray 3, for example, yeah? And the 4th one is kayfiyah, the how. For example, you're told to do tasbih on your fingers, but then you do them on the prayer beads. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're doing things that are from the deen, but you're manifesting them in a way that is in opposition to the sunnah. Now, if the person insists on doing these things after it has even become clear to him and evidence been presented, then it becomes innovation. Does that make sense? So in and within itself, we're not going to say that a thing is bid'ah in itself. For example, you'll find that the prayer beads issue, some scholars, they differed. Some scholars, they allowed it, even though, wallah a'lam, the strongest view seems to be that it is something that's in opposition to the sunnah of the Prophet, and it's something that can be an innovation. It's best to stay away from it. You have your hands. But the point I'm making is that example, just min bab al-fa'ida, was just correction there, because that's not in the same category as that which we talk about is innovation, things that have no asl in the deen. For example, celebrating the Prophet's birthday has no asl in the deen. Does that make sense? Uniting with the innovators has no asl with the deen. Okay? In fact, uniting with the innovators is opposite to the asl, as in it happens in a state of necessity. The necessity is not the asl. Does that make sense?
Right.
You know, and the things that the Shia do, the Barelvis, the Ash'ara, all these things, they have no asl in the deen. Doing da'wah from nasheed has no asl in the deen. Does that make sense? Making politics the foundational focus of your da'wah has no asl in the deen, has no foundation in the deen. So these things are clear-cut innovation. You see what I'm saying? So the question you asked was that, is this worse? Sorry, we went off on a tangent, but that's the question you asked. You said, is it worse than murder and sins or whatever have you?
Yeah.
Of course, the Prophet said it. He said, وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ. He said, it's evil thing. What more do you want from the Prophet? How can you tell me not to take it literally? That's so silly to say. Is the default of not speech that is taken literal?
But sometimes things are said as metaphors, or sort of like sometimes.
But okay, metaphors. But what's the default? What's the default of speech?
The default would be that it's taken literally. But when someone says
the default is that it's taken literally, so then why are you changing your standard for the Prophet's speech? It becomes metaphorical when there's things that indicate it's a metaphor. In Arabic, you call this qara'in. You call this things that indicate it's a metaphor. For example, if I came to you and I said this, I've been hitting my head against the wall. I'm not actually hitting my head against the wall, because you can see I'm a sane man. I'm not going to hit my head against the wall. I've not got no marks on my forehead. My wall doesn't have any blood stains, alhamdulillah. Does that make sense? So you say, it's a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't have any indicators indicating that my kalam is not, my speech is not on its default, then what basis do you have to tell me that this is that I or the Prophet ﷺ could be speaking metaphorically?
It just seems like
this is what the philosophers, the Ash'ari, whatnot do. They believe that the default of the speech, the default of the text, Allah's speech and the Prophet's speech, is not to take it on its apparent.
Right. Well, the thing is, yeah, I saw one of your videos that you had recently called, I think it was prostitution versus innovation, which is worse. And in that video, you mentioned some narrations regarding innovation and why it's so bad. But some of those narrations that you mentioned were actually weak narrations. So as if you're trying to back up this point using weak narration, so therefore the point itself must not really hold much weight. If in order for you to back it up, you have to go to weak narrations that we know are weak and that you yourself will know are weak. So that's where I'm coming from. The point that I'm making is that you know, is it as bad as it's made out to be? I agree it's important. I'm not denying that. The Prophet mentioned it, he spoke about it, but is it as bad as you make it out to be, that it requires to be spoken about as frequently and as dramatically as you do?
I'm going to come to the point that you mentioned about the weak narrations, yeah, but like I just told you, the Prophet say it in his khutbah, so he's saying it frequently, and then you're telling me, is it as dramatic as you're making it out to be? I told the Prophet's eyes would turn red. I told the Prophet would shout when he was saying it. He would become angry when he was saying it. And then you're telling me, but is it as bad? I told you the Prophet said it's the most evil thing. There's nothing more evil than it. So what more do you want? There's nothing more evil than it, akhi. وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ. Let me explain to you the Arabic language how it works. There's something called صيغة التفضيل, which is, you know, the Arabic words come in patterns. Okay, Muslimun, mu'minun, you know, these are patterns that indicate certain meanings. Does that make sense? So there's a pattern called صيغة التفضيل. أكبر, أحسن, أفضل. Does that make sense? Whenever something comes with that, أفضل, أفعل, أفعل, that pattern, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbaru, means, Akbar comes from the word Kabir. Kabir means the greatest. Kabir means the greatest. Sorry, Kabir means great, but Akbar means the greatest. Hasan means good, but Ahsan means the best. Does that make sense? So the word for evil is shar, right? And it used to be ashar. It used to be asharru. But because shar, evil, is such a common word that is used, the Arabs, due to ease, they drop the part. So asharru follows the pattern of akbaru, afdalu, ahsanu, af'alu. It follows that pattern of tafdeel. Does that make sense? So whenever you see the word shar, its original is ashar. So it's not just evil. When you see the word evil, it's not just evil, it's the most evil. Does that make sense? So in the language, like when you're reading it, the most evil thing is the bidah. Does that make sense? So that's to answer that point. That's to answer the issue about the narrations that are weak or whatever have you. I mean, again, I can answer this in many ways. Number one, I'm going to give you narrations from Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Do you believe Al-Bukhari and Muslim is authentic? Yes or no? Of course. You believe Al-Bukhari and Muslim is authentic, right? Yeah. So we're not going to have any issues there, right? No. We're not dealing with hadith rejection, yeah? Okay, alhamdulillah.
As long as it's one of the hadith that Bukhari intended to include as part of his book, because there are some that he mentions.
Yeah, not from his mu'allaqat, the ones that are masanid, the ones with the chains of narrations that meets conditions. I'm going to mention 2 narrations from there, inshallah ta'ala, that show you clearly what I said in that video and what I'm saying to you now shows how evil the innovation is. And I also mentioned 2 statements from the Salaf that back it up. But before I even go into that, I want to ask you a question. Okay, narrations that are weak, can they not become authentic through support?
They can. You mean like through shawahid?
You know the narrations are of 2 types, maqbool and mardud. Narrations that are accepted and narrations which are rejected. The rejected narrations are called da'if and mawdu', weak or fabricated. And there are narrations which are accepted, which are called sahih or hasan. The hasan is of 2 types, hasan li dhati and hasan li ghayri. Hasan that's in within itself, and hasan, it's not in within itself, but it became hasan because of supporting evidences and chain. And how does something which is not hasan in within itself become hasan because of supporting evidence and chain? In and within itself is weak, but it has different chains that support it and it strengthens it. Does that make sense?
Right.
Now, the strengthening of a hadith can come from one or two ways. It can either come from something called mutaba'a, which is that the same narration is reported by someone else and it has an authentic chain or a supporting chain. Or it can be through a shahid, which means that there may not be another chain that backs it up, but there's another hadith that backs up the meaning. Or another ayah in the Quran that backs up the meaning. Does that make sense?
Right.
So those narrations that I mentioned in that video, the two things that I said, which was that
What were
number
they,
one,
if you just want to mention them?
one, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept the tawbah of a person of innovation, and the other hadith, which is that Allah will not accept the good actions, the righteous actions of a person of innovation. Both of these have meanings that are, the meaning in both of these narrations are backed up by meanings in other hadith that are authentic. The meaning, لا مطعن فيه. Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah ta'ala in his Kitab al-I'tisam, which is a kitab on innovation and bid'ah, he mentioned when he talked about this issue of Allah not accepting the righteous actions of the people who do bid'ah, meaning Allah will not accept the Salah and the Zakat and the Siyam and the Hajj and the fasting, Allah will not accept it. He mentioned that some of these narrations you might question their authenticity, but there is an asl foundation for the meaning in these. لا مطعن فيه. There's no criticizing it because it's clear from other narrations that are authentic. And the reason why I use those two weak narrations is narrations that were weak in terms of their individual chains, is because they explain the meaning very clearly, and it was just going to be easier to explain it as opposed to going through the other narrations where I have to do a little bit more explanation, even though those narrations back it up and they're authentic. And this meaning here is authentic anyway. It's not like I brought you something weak, because something can be weak in the chain, but the meaning is authentic because, like I said, it's backed up by somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I just want to mention to you, inshallah ta'ala, something from the scholars of hadith to back this up. This is not something that I put out of my back pocket. Does that make sense? Imam Hafid al-Hakami, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a poetry on hadith. It's called Al-Lu'lu al-Maknoon. And in here he mentions, on the section where he talks about using weak hadith, he said, he said, وَبِالضَّعِيفِ لَا بِتَرْكٍ وُصِفًا وَلَا بِمَدْلُولِ الصَّحِيحِ قَدْ نَفَى يُؤْخَذُ فِي فَضَائِلِ الْأَعْمَالِ لَلْفَرْضِ وَالْحَرَامِ وَالْحَلَالِ. He mentions that when it comes to weak narrations, you're not allowed to use them when it comes to actual rulings in the religion. Like, if you cannot use a weak hadith to make something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made halal haram. And you cannot use a weak hadith to make something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram halal. You cannot use a weak hadith to make something wajib. You cannot use a weak hadith to make something sunnah. You cannot use it to make something makruh. You cannot use it to make something haram. Does that make sense? But if you are using a weak hadith, and number one, the weakness is not too bad. As in, it's not, he said, it's not matruk. Matruk means it's very weak. Like, there's a liar in the chain. There's a guy who's got corrupted memory in the chain. Like, it's a very subtle weakness. It's a weakness, but it's not too bad. And number two, the meaning of the narration is authentic and strong, and it doesn't contradict other narrations. Then you can use it. You can use this narration. Does that make sense?
Right.
In fada'ilul a'mal, you can use it to encourage people to do good things. You can use it in targhib and tarhib. You can use it to warn people of the punishments of Allah and to encourage them to do good things. Does that make sense? And there were many A'immah who did this. In fact, Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he, although there is khilaf on this, there is khilaf. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he transmitted an ijma' on it. Well, like we say, there is khilaf on it nonetheless. And many A'immah of the Sunnah and scholars and ulama of the Sunnah, in fact, the jumhur of the scholars, the majority of the scholars, take this view that you can use weak narrations. You can use weak narrations as long as you're using them and the weakness is not too bad. And number one. Number two, the meaning is backed up through other textual evidences. The meaning must be backed up for other, because some people use weak narrations for Mawlid. Mawlid has no backing from anything authentic in the first place. Does that make sense? There is a foundation in the religion through the authentic narrations that I'm going to show you that explain to us and make it crystal clear to us that a person of innovation, he will not, and most likely not, make tawbah. And his good deeds will not be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll mention these narrations to you. It's going to come, inshallah ta'ala. But because we have those narrations there, I can use this other narration. Why? Because even though there is a subtle weakness, it's not too bad of a weakness. Number two, I'm not bringing anything new. I'm just backing up that which has already been. And scholars mention other conditions when you're using these weak narrations. I will encourage people to go through this kitab. It's called Al-Hadith Al-Da'if. It's, if I'm not mistaken, it was the PhD doctorate that Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Khudair he wrote for his PhD. I think that's what he wrote it for. And you can refer to that, inshallah ta'ala, for more detail. He mentions the khilaf amongst the scholars who said you can't, the scholars who said you can, then being the Jumhur, brings the evidences for it, and so on and so forth. With that said, though, what is where are the authentic, where are the, but you see, that's why it's important to learn. Because there are people that will use a weak hadith, and there's extremes in every chapter, right? There's people who use a weak hadith and there's no foundation. But what are you doing? You can't use a weak hadith in this situation. You can't use this weak hadith in this situation. You heard Imam Hafid al-Hakim, he said clearly, وَلَلْ halali wal harami. You can't use it in terms of rulings. You can't bring a new ruling through a weak hadith. You can use it to back up a ruling that already exists. Yeah, you can use to back up a ruling that already exists, but you can't bring something new from it. You understand? So there's some people that will bring something new from it. The other people that will say, oh, look, you wrote weak hadith. Look at this. You said if he's came to, you know. But I'm like, bro, like, his meaning is authentic. Does that make sense? And by the way, this is something that you learn in Nukhbat al-Fikr. You know, you'd study if a person wants to study, this is the most basic text in Mustalah al-Hadith, which is the principles and the principles and the maxims of the science of hadith. I mean, some people start with al-Bayquniyah, but that's like, some don't even consider that as part of the syllabus. Nukhbat al-Fikr really is where it starts. It's a foundational text. And in Nukhbat al-Fikr, you know, any sharh of it, you take Ibn Hajj al-Sharh himself, to another, you learn this so that you can, inshallah ta'ala, know how this science works. Ala kulli hal, what is the narrations that show and back up that point that I made? And again, shows you the danger of innovation. And if you fall into it, how bad it is. Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah ta'ala in his Kitab al-I'tisam, he starts off by saying, فَأَلَمُوا. I'm going to read his speech because it's not my understanding. And then we mention the salaf that he brings, and I'm going to bring the dalil. He said, فَأَلَمُوا أَنَّ الْبِدْعَةَ لَا يُقْبَلُ مَعَهَا عِبَادَةً. Know that, he said, no, that if you do innovation, the person who does innovation, his ibadah will not be accepted. Min salatin, his salah will not be accepted. Wala siyamin, his fasting will not be accepted. Wala sadaqatin, wala ghayriha, his charity will not be accepted. And anything other, min al-qurubat, from acts of worship that he does, will not be accepted. And then he goes on, that's one thing, right? But then he goes on to mention other things that come as a result of doing bid'ah. Allah's curses upon the person. He will be taken away from the hold of the fountain of the Prophet ﷺ. He will not get the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ. He goes through all these things, and then he later on mentions dalil for all of it. The point I want to mention is that he is telling you that the person's salah, his prayers, not being accepted. I mean, bro, if bid'ah is something that is something light, then why is he saying this is a reason for your acts of worship to not be accepted? Does that make sense? And then he brought a statement from Imam Asad ibn Musa, who said, وقعت اللعنة من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على أهل البدع. The Prophet ﷺ cursed the people of innovation. وإن الله لا يقبل منهم صرفا ولا عدلا فريضة ولا تطوعا. Allah Azza wa Jalla will not accept from the person of innovation any obligatory thing that he does, even a voluntary act of worship, even sunnah praise, Allah will not accept from him. وَكُلَّمَا ازْدَادُوا اجْتِهَادًا. Every time he puts more effort in trying to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, صَوْمًا وَصَلَاةً, he prays more, he fasts more, ازْدَادُوا مِنَ اللَّهِ بُعْدًا. He becomes even further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He becomes even further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he brings a statement from Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani. He said, مَزْدَادَ صَاحِبُ بِدْعَةً اجْتِهَادًا إِلَّا ازْدَادَ مِنَ اللَّهِ بُعْدًا. He said, as a person of innovation, every time he does more ibadah, he puts more effort in trying to get close to Allah, he actually gets further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more worship he does, the further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he goes, because Allah is not accepting his good deeds. Does that make sense? He mentions Hisham ibn Hassan, لا يقبل الله من صاحب بدعة صلاة ولا صيام ولا زكاة ولا حج ولا جهاد ولا عمرة ولا صدقة ولا عتقا ولا صرفا ولا عدلا. He said Allah will not accept from the person of innovation his prayers, his fasting, his zakat, his hajj, his jihad, his umrah, his charity. If he freed a slave, even he said, even if he freed a slave, Allah will not accept it from him. Sarfan, anything obligatory, adlan, anything, even if he moves things from the street, Allah will not accept it from him. Okay? And then he mentions so many other things. What's the evidence for this now? Right? What's the evidence for this?
Yep.
Firstly, now understand that Imam Ash-Shatibi rahimahullah ta'ala, he then goes on to divide the rejection of the people's good actions into two categories.
Okay.
He said there's a type of bidah that you do that will destroy the action itself. For example, you do bidah in the salah. What happens to salah?
Salah is null and void.
Null and void. That's not the one that these A'imma from the Salaf who I just quoted were talking about. Because if a person does bidah in his salah is nullified, but does that mean his other actions are nullified as well?
Not necessarily, no.
No, right? Good. But here they're talking Allah won't accept his salah, his zakat, obligatory. They're saying Allah is not accepting anything from this person. So then Shatibi said this is a different category. This is a category where if you have, remember the Prophet said, "Man amila amalan laysa alayhi amruna fahuwa rad." Anyone who does an action which is not from our religion, then the action is going to be rejected. Now, the actions of the people, in order to understand the categorization, Imam Shatibi, we need to understand the actions of our religion are divided into what? Foundations and sub-branches. So I want you to imagine it like a house. Okay? If the house within the build, if the foundation of the house is corrupted, what happens to the whole house?
The house will fall down.
But if there is a problem in one of the rooms of the house, like there's a leakage in one of the rooms of the house, what happens?
That room will get messed up, but it doesn't necessitate.
But the rest of the house
house
will still remain, right?
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, obviously, it depends on how bad the leak is, but yeah,
of course.
Generally speaking.
Yeah, of course. So the point is that because the Prophet said anyone who does an act of worship which is not from our religion, then it will be rejected. Now, if the thing that you're doing which is not from the religion is a foundation upon which you build your salah, and a foundation upon which you build your zakat, and a foundation which you build the rest of your ibadat, then by virtue of that foundation not being from the religion, all that which you built on it is also going to be,
for example,
null and void. For example, I'm going to now bring you to the hadith in the Sahih of Imam Muslim. The first hadith that Imam Muslim brought in his Sahih, the hadith of Jibreel. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma was approached by two men who came to him from Iraq. They told him about a man who fell short. He became corrupted with regards to the belief in Qadr. He became corrupted with regards to the belief in Qadr. Now, is Qadr a foundational belief upon which other beliefs are built?
Yeah.
It is. It's one of the pillars of Iman. And you know the hadith Jibreel, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره وكما قال. This is this hadith. Ibn Umar mentions it after this. Look what Ibn Umar said, رضي الله تعالى عنهما. He said, إذا لقيت أولئك. He said, if you meet these people, he said to them, if you meet these people who are denying the qadr, the ones who are denying the qadr, he said, إذا لقيت أولئك فأخبرهم أني بريء منهم. He said, inform them that I am free from them, وأنهم براء مني, and they are free from me, meaning we're disunited. Yeah? Back in our previous podcast. He said, فَوَالَّذِي يَحْلِفُ بِهِ. He said, I swear by the one who is sworn by. I take a qasam by the one who is a qasam is being taken by, right? لو كان لأحد مثل أحد ذهبا فأنفقه ما تقبله الله منه حتى يؤمن بالقدر. He said, I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if any one of them had the mountain of Uhud worth in gold, I said they had in money, like that was the size of the mountain of Uhud in gold, and they were to give it in charity, Allah will not accept it from him until he comes back to the belief of Qadr. So what is this? This is an act of worship. They denied the Qadr, but the rest of the actions are being... The point here is, what does charity have to do with Qadr? If they deny Qadr, then they should be punished for the Qadr, right? Their belief in Qadr should be rejected. But Ibn Umar connected the charity that they would give, which is an act of worship that is built upon foundational beliefs. So because they came short in a foundational belief, what happened? The rest of it got rejected. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, some people said, wait, Ibn Umar was doing takfir of them. And Imam Nawawi, rahmahullah ta'ala, who explains Sahih Muslim, when he explains the hadith, he mentioned the different views. He says some mentioned it was takfir, but then even again, the takfir came from innovation. So that proves our point, that innovation takes you to kufr, which will lead you to not being good, which will lead you to your deeds not being accepted. But he also mentioned that no, there's another view. And it seemed that he was backing up this view. Does that make sense? And this is the view that Shatibi is backing up. And this is the view that the rest of the Aim of the Salaf are backing up, that I mentioned prior, right? Which is that sometimes you may do an act of worship, sometimes you may do an act of worship, and that act of worship that you do, sometimes you may do a sin, afwan, and that sin will affect the other acts of worship that you do. For example, then Imam Muslim gives an example. He said, some of the scholars said, a person who prays in a house that's stolen, his salah is not accepted. He said,
because the house was stolen.
Because the house was stolen. Even though there's different opinion on that. Say that again? As in a land. You occupied land unjustly. You took over someone's land.
Who you pick up the guy's yard.
Yeah, sorry, as in you usurp someone's land unjustly.
Okay.
Now you're praying on that land.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
he said now the act of worship that you're doing is now being what? Affected because of something, because of a sin that you did. Now imagine the sin is bidah. Does that make sense? Imagine the sin is bidah. Another example that comes on this, and I haven't given you my hadith from Al-Bukhari and Muslim. I'm still going to give it. We're waiting to give you the hadith. We're waiting for the hadith, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah. But to show you how serious this is, then there's a group of people who don't take the khabr al-ahad. There's a group of people that don't take the narrations, the singular narrations in hadith, right? Because they take their aql over the text. Imam Shatibi said these people here, for them, also, they are at risk of all of their acts of worship being rejected. Because the majority of this of the Sunnah is the Khabr al-Ahad, is the singular narrations. But you reject the singular narrations. And by the way, the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya, which unfortunately is the majority of Muslims in the world, they take this. They believe this. Also, another example that he gives, so because you're rejecting the majority of the Sunnah in Aqidah, that means your Aqidah is what? Is devoid of Sunnah, which means you built it on something other than the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Does that make sense? Yeah. Another example he gives, the people who take the aql over the text. They believe that the aql is used as a primary thing to interpret the text. So when they come to the Quran and Sunnah, they don't bring the statements of the Salaf and the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ. They bring it as a support for their aql. They bring it as a support for their intellect. They make the intellect the primary way to interpret the text. So then that means your understanding of the Quran is based on your aql, which means your understanding of the Quran is based on innovation in the first place. So everything that you do after that is automatically null and void. And these are the ones that are being spoken about when they said nothing is going to be accepted from them. Does that make sense? And there are many other examples. Like there's some people who their religion is based on what? Politics. Ikhwan al-Muslimin, their whole religion, they interpret the Quran and Sunnah based on politics. So then they are now at risk of potentially all, because remember, Ikhwanis will tell you what? You can get a mortgage. Why? Because you have to understand their foundational belief. What's their foundational belief here? The foundational belief of Ikhwan al-Muslimin is that we need to get into power. I'm oversimplifying it, but just to make it easy for you to understand, is we need to get into power. We need to become rulers. So then they will destroy rulings within the Sharia to fit around this primary principle. So because their foundation, their primary principle, which is a foundation, is an innovation, they will now tamper with the rest of the religion to fit into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. To
the point where they'll just flip things around. They'll do jihad. They'll assassinate. They'll do protests. Inkar al-munkar, forbidding evil, and good, forbidding evil. None of it's going to be accepted from them. Right? None's going to be accepted from them. Wallahu a'lam wa a'lam. It seems that it's not going to be accepted from them because it's built upon a foundation which is innovated in the first place. Does that make sense? Yeah? So, where's the hadith now? The hadith, I can give you many. I'll give you just one hadith, which is the hadith in Al-Bukhari Muslim. The hadith of Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam's cousin. Very famous hadith. People know the beginning of it, but they don't know the end. I will mention the end and they can find the beginning themselves. It's a very famous hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, as narrated by Ali, Al-Madinatu haramun. Medina is sacred. Min ayrin ila kada. From this place to this place. Man ahdatha fiha hadathan. Anyone who does an innovation in Medina, فَعَلَيْهِ لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ وَالنَّاسِ أَجْمَعِينَ. Upon this person is the curse of Allah, the curse of the angels, and the curse of all of mankind. And then look what the Prophet said. لا يقبل الله منه صرفا ولا عدلا. Allah will not accept from this person صرفا ولا عدلا. What does it mean Allah will not accept from him صرفا ولا عدلا? Imam Ibn Hajar, who explained Sahih al-Bukhari in his Fath al-Bari, he mentioned that it means, according to the majority, the Jumhur, the majority of scholars, as-sarf means al-fariḍah, obligatory actions, and al-adl means an-nafila, it means voluntary actions. Does that make sense? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept from them obligatory actions or voluntary actions. So this is where the Salaf are getting it from. Now one may say, hey, but the hadith mentions Medina. I say, right, but the same reason as being rejected in Medina will be rejected outside Medina. Because then we have the other narration where the Prophet said, "Man amila amalan laysa alayhi amruna fahuwa rad." Anyone who does an action which is not from our religion will be rejected. So the reason being rejected in Medina is because it's not from our religion. So if you do it in Iraq, it's still not from our religion. It's still going to be rejected. Does that make sense? Yeah. And when Ibn Umar said that their action is not going to be rejected, he was in Medina and they were in Iraq. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you understand? So that's a joke. And then the second thing that I mentioned, which was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept their tawbah, right? What does this mean? They want a narration that backs this up. Again, I'll bring you a narration from the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari and the Sahih of Imam Muslim, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he talked about the people of innovation, he said, يَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ كَمَا يَمْرُقُ السَّهَمْ مِنَ الرَّمِيَّةِ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the people of innovation, they leave through the religion the way that the arrow goes to the bow. Pay attention. If you fire a bow through an arrow, so you fire an arrow for a bow, what happens to that arrow? What happens?
It goes through the air. What do you mean?
And it doesn't come back. Yes or no?
No, it doesn't come back.
Does it come back by itself?
No.
No. The Prophet ﷺ said, يَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ, they go through the religion, كَمَا يَمْرُقُ السَّهَمْ مِنَ الرَّمِيَّةِ ثُمَّ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ إِلَيْهِ حَتَّى يَرْجِعُ السَّهَمْ عَلَى فَوْقِهِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, or كما قال, that they go through the religion the way that arrow goes to the bow, and they will not come back to the religion. Look what the Prophet said. They will not
come back
to the religion. They will not come back to the religion. They will not come back to the religion until the arrow comes back to the bow by itself. Can the arrow come back to the bow by itself?
No.
Highly unlikely, which means it's highly unlikely for them to make tawbah. So then that narration which I mentioned, it has a meaning that's backed up in this. And whose understanding is this? It's not mine. It's how the Salaf understood it. They use this narration. Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani rahimahullah ta'ala was approached by a man. He said, رَجَعَ Amr ibn Ubayd min qawlihi an ra'yihi. Amr ibn Ubayd was one of the heads of the Mu'tazila. A man came to him and he said, he came back from his view. As in, Amr ibn Ubayd repented. And Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani, Imam min A'immat al-Tabi'een, who is a student of the Sahaba, he said, لا يرجع. He said, he didn't make tawbah. He said, he made tawbah. He said, he didn't make tawbah. He said, he didn't make tawbah. Then 3 times, Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani said, Wallahi, لا يرجع. لم يرجع. Wallahi لم يرجع. Wallahi لم يرجع. 3 times he said, I swear by Allah, he didn't come back. He didn't come back. He didn't come back. Yeah, Amr ibn Ubayd, he didn't go and research what the guy said. He didn't investigate. Oh, did he make tawbah? No, he's just telling him, no, I don't even want to hear it. He didn't make tawbah. And then he says, did you not hear the hadith? And then he mentioned this hadith. Meaning that the Ahl Bidah, the arrow, what does it do? It just advances. It gets further and further away from the bow. So a person Bidah, if he does change his view, he goes where? Further and further away. This is al-Dabit, underline this for the brothers and sisters, yeah? People of Bidah, they always get worse and worse as time goes on. As time goes on, they get worse and worse and worse. The innovation gets worse and worse and worse, and they get more and more corrupted. So he's saying, if you're telling me he changed his view, he changed it to a view which is worse. He didn't come back. Does that make sense? And these were the narrations that the Salaf used to use to say, Tawbah is what? Tawbah doesn't come from a person of innovation. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahmahullah ta'ala, when in his Majmu' al-Fatawa, when he discussed this, he said, he mentioned that people have a misunderstanding that when they say that Allah will not accept the tawbah of the passive innovation, they don't mean that it doesn't mean that if the passive innovation makes tawbah, Allah won't accept it. But if you make tawbah from shirk, Allah will accept it, right? If you make tawbah from shirk, will Allah accept it? Yes or no? He will.
Yeah,
That's not what it means. What it means is that the situation for him to make tawbah will not come about in the first place. And why would it? Because he doesn't believe in doing anything wrong. The passive innovation believes that what is he doing?
it's correct.
He sees himself mu'adhimun lillahi azza wa jal. He sees himself as one who's honoring Allah. He sees himself as one who's honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sees himself that he's really worshipping Allah. He's really doing a good job. He's really doing a good job. Does that make sense? And as every year goes by, he becomes more and more conviction. I ask you a question. How many drug dealers have you heard that made tawbah?
A lot.
How many fornicators and prostitutes have you heard that made tawbah?
A lot.
And that's not an exaggeration. We actually heard of prostitutes that made tawbah.
Yeah.
How many musicians that have you heard of that made tawbah?
Again, a lot.
Sinners, people who are upon major sin make tawbah. Now, tell me how many people who are on innovation and they call to the innovation. I'm not talking about your local guy who doesn't know that you go and explain, he comes back. But people who are heads of innovation make tawbah. We've seen heads of gangs make tawbah. Heads of what? Evil industries and crimes and music industries. Heads of music industries make tawbah. Look, brother Loon, head of the music industry, from the heads of the music industry. Bad Boy Entertainment, what did he do? He made tawbah. Napoleon, from the heads of the music industry, he made tawbah. Does that make sense? Name me one person you know from the heads of innovation that made tawbah in your time that you've witnessed.
No one comes to mind. I mean, you kind of put me in the spot, but no one comes to mind straight away.
Am I saying that it's impossible? No, because it did happen. It has happened. It's rare. And that's the point that you had to, like when you fall into innovation, and this is what I'm trying to get through to the brothers, is that if you fall into innovation, you're most likely not coming back. You're most likely not coming back. And it's going to take you to the hellfire. It's going to take you to the hellfire. And it's the most evil thing. And it's going to take a person to the hellfire. And they won't come back from it. They won't come back from it. Al-Bukhari, Muslim, I gave you the hadith. Does that make sense? There's many more I can give you. But I just give
Okay. That's a fair argument. So the final thing that I would then mention, or that I would then try and counteract with, is I agree it's important. I agree it's worse than major sins. But here in the UK, is it because you're based in the UK, you give da'wah mainly to the UK, obviously online, international, what? In terms of your offline, your events, and the massages, so on and so forth. And you've got, massive issues, gun crime, knife crime, gang crime in general, running rife throughout the communities, drugs, so on and so forth. You've got Zina, Muslim youth are sexually active outside of marriage. All these social issues are arising. Yet one of your main focuses, again, as mentioned previously, seems to be this issue of bid'ah. So don't you think, given the time and the place and the situation, that it's more pertinent to focus on the social issues that are ravaging through society rather than these theological issues?
But that's implying that these social issues and the sins that people do don't have any connection to their theological corruptions.
Yeah.
To their creedal corruptions.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that the zina that most people are doing is based on bid'ah.
How did you reach that conclusion?
What have you not heard people who sin a lot? They say a lot, my iman is in my heart, don't judge me.
Only Allah can judge me, I hear that, yeah.
Only Allah can judge me. You don't know what's in my heart. You don't know what's in my heart. Yeah, I sell drugs. Yeah, I listen to music. Yeah, I fornicate. Yeah, I sleep with men. Yeah, I do this. Yeah, I do that. Yeah, I had abortions. Yeah, I murdered my baby. But you don't know what's in my heart.
Yeah.
Whether they say it or not, is that not what they believe?
Yeah, it's about the heart.
Did you know this is one of the most common innovations that came out that the Salaf are refuting, and it's in almost every single Aqidah book it's mentioned? It's called irja, which is that you're trying to make it as if your actions don't indicate your iman. And your iman is something in the heart. As long as you know Allah, you're a believer. And you're not better than me, and I'm not better than you. Which is the belief of the Ash'ari and whatnot. Okay? Which is the belief of these groups. that you're not better than me and I'm not better than you. Do you know Allah? Do I know Allah? Yeah, we're the same now. What essence states on this is that also you're the same as the Prophet ﷺ. And also Iblis knows Allah. He's also the same as well. And Jibreel, we're all the same. We know Allah. And that's really where it comes from. The point I'm making is that there's a foundation. People may not know the specifics and the nuances of this belief. But what allowed this belief to become famous, the Asha'ira, the Sufiya, the Maturidiyya, all these groups that have this belief that Iman is in the heart and it's not on the actions. Because when a person says, hey, don't judge me for not wearing hijab, don't judge me for not praying, don't judge me. What they're trying to say is don't judge me based on my actions. My actions don't indicate the quality of my Iman and my faith. No, this bidah. Your actions do. The Prophet ﷺ said, ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. In the body there's a morsel of flesh. If it's healthy, the rest of the body is healthy. If it's corrupted, the rest of the body is corrupted. It is the heart, which shows you that the heart reflects what's inside of it onto the limbs. If I got a bottle of water and it's cold, I don't have to put my finger inside the water to see if it's cold. The cold can be felt on the outside of the bottle. Every vessel sweats that which is inside of it. So this is an innovative belief. It's based on innovation. It's based on innovation. Right. The kids on the streets, when they murder and they kill and they stab, it's based on what? It's based on them being arrogant. So you have to teach them Allah's names and attributes to show them that you are nothing and Allah is great. But then the moment I try to teach you Allah's names and attributes, the Asha'ira are going to say, you're going to say, look at you. This is kufr. How can you affirm these names and attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the bidah became a problem for me now. So then we give da'wah to these kids. They go listen to a person innovation. Sometimes I know a guy who I gave da'wah to, and he ended up joining ISIS and he got killed.
Because of your da'wah?
No, because I blame myself to some extent because I never used to speak about innovation. The first people of innovation I ever started to speak about was the Khawarij, was ISIS, because of what happened to that brother. He got killed, man. And I thought maybe because he used to listen to me, I could have said something and maybe he wouldn't have gone. But I used to say, no, I've got bigger things to talk about than Bidah. But when I talked about ISIS, everyone loved it. But when I talk about other Bidah, they don't want me to talk about it. Why? Why are you picking and choosing? All Bidah is the same then, isn't it? All Bidah should be discussed. Not just that, I ask you a question. Would you agree with me that there is a greater problem that we have in the West, greater than zina and murder and killing, and that's apostasy?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
What do you think the foundation of apostasy is?
Kufr, as in...
Muhammad ibn Sirin said, he used to see أن أحرص الناس على ردة أهل الأهواء, that the people that are most likely and the quickest to leave the fold of Islam and to apostate are the people of innovation. And well, it's true. When you look at
Isn't it people of desires?
Say that again?
Isn't Ahlul Hawa people of desires?
Ahlul Hawa is desires, but if you see in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَأْلَمْ فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكَ فَإِنَّهُمْ يَتَّبِعُونَ أَهْوَاءَهُم. Allah said, no, O Muhammad, that if they do not listen to you, they don't follow the Sunnah, they know that they're following their desires. So Bidah is the opposite to following the Sunnah, right? So then the scholars used to refer to people of desires as people of innovation. Because anyone who opposes the Sunnah, whether he says no is desires or not, whether he says no is desire, it's not desires, it is desires. Because Allah said either they follow the Prophet or they follow their desires. So all of Bidah is desires. And that's why you find the Salaf would refer to people of Bidah as Ahl-Ahwa. So the point I'm making is that if you look at a lot of these people that are ex-Muslims, ask them, what do you used to be? Shia, they used to say. Ash'ari, they used to say. Maturidi, they used to say. Someone would say they were what? Qadiani, which is the kuffar aslan, they're not even Muslim. You find that they were people of innovation. Wallahi, innovation is stupid. When you look at the beliefs of the Asha'ira, you look at the beliefs of the Shia, wallahi, they're very hard to reconcile textually, even common sense wise. Of course,
so you're saying Salafis don't? You think Salafis not apostate?
I'm not saying that they can't, but let me ask you a question. Like, do you see? Like, look at these apostates. What are they? I'm not saying they can't be. But what I'm saying is Salafi is not the cause for it. The cause for, if anyone's wondering why the screen looks different, is because I've just changed my device that I'm on. But yeah, I'm just saying, look, sometimes just ask yourself, like the reality, like I'm saying, when you look at these people, you realize they come from very, very innovative backgrounds. Sarahatan, because I remember when I used to do a lot of da'wah to non-Muslims and the whole ex-Muslim movement, was kind of, about or whatever have you. In fact, it's basically dead now. People shouldn't give them any attention, but they were starting to talk a bit. They made some foundations and whatnot and so on and so forth. And wallahi, when you looked, every one of them was either one of two. They were either Sufi or Shi'i. They were Sufi Ash'ari or Shi'i Mu'tazili, because the Shia today are Mu'tazila. Does that make sense? So and by the way, there's an ayah to back this up. There's an ayah to back this up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُم فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُم عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Allah said, let them take a warning, the ones who oppose the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's affairs. What's the warning? What's the warning that they should take? أَن تُصِيبَهُم فِتْنَةٌ, that they may be struck by a fitna or a tormenting punishment. Imam Ibn Kathir, when he explained this ayah, he mentioned fitna here is kufr. And the adabun alim, a tormenting punishment, is that they could be imprisoned or given the had, they could be lashed, or even in some cases, their punishment could reach capital punishment, execution. And of course, that would be in the hand of the Islamic government, and it's not for people to carry out on a vigilante thing like the way ISIS and them kind of guys do. But the point of the matter is that he said fitna means kufr. Why? Because you disobey the Prophet once, you disobey him twice, 3 times, 4 times, and then you disobey him in foundations, and that's it, you're a kafir now. Does that make sense? Now you will say, but Ibn Kathir, he's not an imam from the Salaf. I'll say to you, he's an imam from this. You know, to be an imam from the imams of the Salaf, you don't have to be from the time of the Salaf. You just have to be upon their path. He's upon their path. But if you want someone from their time, I'll give it to you. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He said, I'm amazed by people. They come across the hadith and they know its authenticity, and they still take the view of Sufyan al-Thawri over the hadith. Like how today you bring someone a hadith, he takes the view of Shafi'i or Abu Hanifa, even though he knows the hadith is authentic, he'll still go with the statement of the man. And then he said what? He said, they do this, and Allah said, and then he mentioned the verse, let them take a warning that if they, oppose the Prophet ﷺ, they will be struck by fitna. And then he said, Atadri, ayil fitna? He said, do you know what fitna this is? They said, what fitna? He said, ash-shirk. He said, it will lead to shirk. Bidah will lead to shirk. Does that make sense? So you're telling me to deal with innovation. You're telling me to deal with innovation. You're telling me to deal with sins, and you're telling me to deal with people who are leaving Islam and to be focused on the bigger picture. I'm saying, bro, that pick the big, you're not seeing the bigger picture. You're actually looking at specifics. The bigger picture is innovation. I remember our brother, I used to be on the dawah table, was given street dawah and whatnot, and I did it for many years, about 5 years plus. And I remember I came to the masjid one day, and the brother said to me something profound. He said, you're out here giving da'wah to the kuffar. You're like a shepherd who's got many sheep. And as you're trying to bring new sheep into your sanctuary, which is fenced, you don't realize that your fence is broken from the back. And as you're bringing people in, you got more people leaving from the back door. And that made me think, wow, that's so profound. Innovation is that back door. You understand? Innovation is the breakage in the fence. It's bid'ah. And that bid'ah can take you to kufr. And you leave. So that's why we have to talk about it. We have to discuss it. Wallahu a'la wa a'lam.
Barakallahu feek, bro. Jazakallahu khaira. I think that was a very, very beneficial discussion. A lot of questions were answered. Any final parting words, any final advice you would give to the brothers and sisters watching this who've made it this far into the discussion?
Wallahi, I would urge you to do 2 things. Number 1, make dua to Allah Azza wa Jal to protect you from innovation. If you're really concerned, you will make dua. How many of you made dua to be protected from corona? I'm sure many of you did. That's a disease that affects the body. How many of you have even once in your life made dua to be accepted from the disease of the heart, innovation? So you've got to ask Allah, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابُ. Allah, do not divert our hearts. The second thing is that after you've asked Allah, what can you do? You could do 2 things, inshallah. Number 1, study and accompany the people of the Sunnah. Study and accompany the people of the Sunnah, the people who are upon the path of the Salaf. Study it and accompany them. And the second thing that you can do is also stay away from bid'ah and its people. So study the Sunnah and accompany its people, As for Bidah, don't study and stay away from its people. To the point where some of the Salaf said, don't even look at a person of innovation. Fudail ibn Iyad, rahimahullah ta'ala, used to say, it's not permissible for you to even look at a person of innovation. Don't even look at them. Because if you look at them, you have to be in their presence to look at them, right? Either in the presence of them in the flesh or the presence of their video. Now you might hear something. And Mufaddal ibn Muhalhal said that these people of innovation, when you go to them, sometimes they'll fool you. They won't straight away mention the innovation, because if they did, you'd run away. So they'll start by mentioning a hadith to you, sunnah, 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 sunnah. One tactic that they have is that they teach books of fiqh. Because in books of fiqh, you can mention a hadith, you can mention statements of the Salaf, right? But they won't mention, but Aqidah books they won't teach. Because the Aqidah books, they go against it, right? They go against it. So they won't quote the Salaf when it comes to Aqidah, because the Aqidah is not from the Salaf. They'll quote the other Imams that came after. But to make you think, this guy's a Salafi, Allah, but they teach a book of fiqh. And then with fiqh, yeah, of course you can mention Salaf. That even the Hanafis and Shafi'is, Malikis, they're always mentioning it, you know what I'm saying? So then it will make you think, this guy's serious. But then if you spend enough time with him, Fadl ibn Muhalhal said, when he knows he's got you, he'll throw his innovation into your chest. Imam al-Bayjuri, he was an imam from the Ash'ara, used to mention, because the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila believe the Quran is created, and the Ash'ara, they don't believe, they believe that there are two Qur'ans. They believe that there's two speeches of Allah, the speech which is within him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the speech which is in the Mus'haf. Speech which is within him doesn't come out of him, so then that's got no relevance to us. So then what is the speech that's got relevance? It's the Quran. They believe that's created. And they actually say, Al-Bayjuri, who is one of the A'imma, he said clearly and emphatically, do not tell this to people. Only mention it in our circles of knowledge, because it will confuse them. Does that make sense? So they hide these things, and they don't want to tell you until the time is right, and then boom, they'll throw the shobah into your heart. And then Fadl ibn Muhalhal said, when is it going to come out? It may never come out. Like Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani said, what he took from the hadith of Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, it's like an arrow, just go further, and you don't come back. It's very scary. So beg Allah, and then do your part. Your part is two things: accompany people with Sunnah and study the Sunnah, and stay away from people with Bidah and don't study the Bidah. And don't study from them. Wallahu a'la wa a'lam.
Khair, inshallah. Barakallahu feek wa jazakallahu khair. And inshallah, we will see you guys on the next episode of Roast Dawahman next week, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We want many things in life, but one thing that summarizes all that we want is we want good. We want goodness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran how we can all acquire goodness. Primarily in the next life, which is what really counts, right? Because what point is there if you had so much good in this world, but in the next life, you are a loser? In Surah Al Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you will not reach goodness. You will never acquire it until you spend for the sake of Allah out of that which you love. When this ayah came down, there was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who owned a beautiful garden, and it was very beloved to this companion. The moment he heard this ayah, he wanted to implement it straight away, because although he had a beautiful, lovely garden, he knew that there was a greater good, which was the garden in the next life, the garden of Jannah that he wants. So he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he gave it in the cause of Allah. Like, if you deep it for a second, when you love something, you spend money on it. You love your children, you spend money on your children. You love yourself, you spend money on yourself. But you're supposed to love Allah and Islam more than all of these things. How much have you spent in Allah's cause? The Prophet ﷺ had companions there that were willing at the drop of a hat to fund whatever cause it was that was needed to be funded for the sake of Allah. And we today, in similar fashion, are reaching out to you. If we can get 100 people to give £50 at the link below, you can help us in getting closer to our next target. And if you can't give 50, give 50p. Remember what Allah said in the ayah, وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. Whatever you give from good, Allah knows. You may get £50. You may get 50p. You may get 5p. But that could be the reason for you to enter paradise. With that said, please click the link below. And we're going to carry on doing what we do. But we need you, with Allah's permission, to do what you need to do. And that's to support the cause of Allah. Assalamu alaikum. Peace.